within a sustained fight for women's self-respect in a patriarchal setup, Durga ANAND's Bhajan 65 and Ghazal 64 are eloquent additions to her collection of exquisite compositions. Bhajan 64 expostulates on the degradation of the status of women in that period, which saw a downgrading from strong to weak, whereas in earlier periods, in early other contexts, women were treated with greater respect or esteem, and the appellation then was strong. To understand the leitmotif of Bhajan 64 and Ghazal 64 and Bhajan 65, we must first step into to understand the leitmotif, which is sabla se abla, from strong to weak, the four are faible, from might to plight. We must first step into the world in which it was written. This is the kernel point of this bhajan. Let's consider the historical, socio-political, religious, cultural backdrop of these intense, amazingly well-crafted hymns. Punjab had been through Mughal rule, had expanded during Emperor Ranjit Singh's reign, and was then in the throes of British Raj. Running through these predominant nationhood frames is a deeply patriarchal social order. Women's roles were confined very often to the domestic sphere. Our earlier bhajan presentations, bhajans 33, 39, Updesh 48, have already highlighted laws passed to improve the status of women in colonial and post-colonial times in Punjab. Ghazal 64 and Bhajan 65 enable us to consider at greater length the hurt inflicted on women in the very language used to address them. The narrator in Durga Anand's bhajans expresses discrimination against women in certain striking formulation like the sabla se abla, from might to plight, and the four are faible. To grasp this complexity, we shall concentrate on linguistic history in Punjab first. Languages in India and Punjab's history were enmeshed during these diverse reigns, in diverse histories, and this resulted in a fascinating multicultural linguistic interweaving. Languages, now we just consider the main languages in these different reigns. Persian had been the court language under Mughals, but with the Sikhs and later the British, Punjabi, Urdu, Hindi, English all coexisted in layered ways. Women often had the least access, not equal access, let's say, to literacy in these languages. Punjab, especially from the religious point of view, was a mosaic of various religions. Hindus, Sikhs, Muslims, and others coexisted, but patriarchal customs cut across religious lines. There were reformist movements like the Sabhas in the late 19th and the early 20th centuries saw the rise of the organization like Arya Samaj, Singh Sabha, Brahmo Samaj, and others. These groups celebrated earlier social reforms, debated social reforms, including widow remarriage, female education, and caste inequalities. But women's empowerment often remained secondary to male-led reformist agendas. The leitmotif, sabla se abla, suggesting that the supposedly sabla, strong woman, has been made abla, weak, is echoing the lived reality of women across these various frames. It is both a lament and a critique of how political and cultural shifts fail to change women's subordinate condition. One of my grandmother's Ghazal number 64 narrates the insult made to women who were addressed as shoes by men in Hindi. I was trying to find similar shoe categories, insults for men and women in English. Each languages have diverse linguistic traditions. In Hindi, Urdu poetic traditions, more in Hindi, less in Urdu. As in the Ghazal, jutti, juta, shoe, sandal, is sometimes used in satirical or bitter verses as a metaphor for contempt, humiliation, or low regard. Men calling women their shoes reflects a patriarchal insult, reducing women to something trodden on. In English, however, there isn't an exact parallel tradition of directly equating women with shoes as a common insult. Still, a few comparable categories exist where shoes, footwear imagery is tied to status, servitude, or contempt. Doormat, a frequent metaphor in English, especially for women, though also for men, implies someone who is trampled on, submissive, or treated without respect. There are other metaphors too, ways of addressing people to demean them. I chose one from my own translation, which is not fit to tie his or her shoes. This expression indicates total inferiority. On the other hand, you have expressions in English like stepping into someone's shoes. In French, you say être dans les pompes de quelqu'un. It can be neutral, but when turned ironic, it can reduce someone to replaceable status. What is different is that in English, these insults are not specifically gendered towards women the way they are in Hindi. Instead, they are used broadly for inferiority, submission, or worthlessness. The movement. So we come back to this movement, which has been defined or designated by Durga ANAND from abla to sabla, weak to strong, framed against the general theory of action, that is purusharth, effort, striving, is a powerful example of how language, history, and social critique come together in devotional poetry. A few things stand out historically and linguistically. The line और कौमों में तो देखो अबला से सबला बनी हम ही हो गई सबला से अबला. This is a strikingly modern use of language. She's using sabla and abla not just as adjectives but as political categories, reclaiming agencies for women and shaming complacency. There is a decidedly language layering occurring too. Now words like purusharth, prathak, sabla, abla, ground of Sanskrit origin, ground the poem in classical moral philosophy. On the other hand, Persian Urdu borrowings like nisbat, manind, bekhabar, padvi add lyrical, cultural resonance from Indo-Persian literary tradition. This hybrid register mirrors the lived speech of educated women in North India in the early 20th century, neither pure Sanskritic nor Persian heavy Urdu, but something distinctively their own. Although addressed as a devotional bhajan, these poems are very much social manifestos. The devotional frame legitimizes the call for women's empowerment in a setting where overt political speech might not have been acceptable. Sabla Abla. By flipping the Abla stereotype, Durga ANAND aligns with a broader 19th-20th century trend in women's reform writing, often in Hindi, Bengali, Marathi. The contrast itself becomes a rhetorical hinge, a way to critique social decay and inspire collective strength. There are metaphors of unity which are really surprising. The closing image, Mil Jav Pani Manind, unite like water. is beautifully organic. It contrasts with pratik rehna, remaining apart, marking sabla as not only individual strength but as collective solidarity. So when you place sabla, abla, able into this framework, because able, I thought of able, it just struck me, they were visually so close. It shows how Durga Anand was consciously reshaping cultural vocabulary, transforming a term of weakness into one of empowerment in both Hindi and English thought worlds. So we were talking about the similarity, visual similarity between the English word able, the Hindi word abla, and the contrary, which is sabla. So we are in the register without strength, powerless, weak. Let's peer into their linguistic origins. In English, able comes from a Latin origin, and so the English word has decidedly also an Indo-European origin, but Latin, which means capable and having power. The word abla is a compound word from Sanskrit with negation, with strength. So abla without strength, powerless. This is from the Indo-Aryan branch of Sanskrit, which is also Indo-European. Both come from the Proto-Indo-European language family, but English able comes through Latin, from Latin to French to English. Hindi abla comes through Sanskrit and Hindi. They are not directly related in form, but both ultimately trace back to PIE roots having to do with strength and ability. Able and abla are false friends. In French, you say des faux amis. They look similar, both deal with ability and power, but their forms developed independently. They both descend from the larger Indo-European family. At the very deepest level, they are false cousins. So this interesting linguistic history with enmeshing and interweaving of Persian and Sanskrit leads to these very powerful concepts. I had problems translating from sabla to abla and accepting the fact that the word juta and juti, shoes, in Hindi was a gendered use of language. It was a metaphor, contempt, humiliation, or low regard. Men calling women their shoes reflects a patriarchal insult, reducing women to something trodden on. In English, however, there isn't any exact parallel tradition of directly equating women with shoes as a common insult. Having looked very closely into the linguistic origins of the expression from the sabla, abla, from strong to weak, from fort, faible to faible. Hence, the sentence, mil jao pani manind, prathak rehna acha nahi. This sentence reflects the linguistic reality of India in 1915. Perso-Arabic vocabulary was still deeply embedded from centuries of Mughal and Urdu literary culture. Sanskrit-derived words were being emphasized by reformers as part of cultural revival. This single line carries the fusion of Ganga-Jamuni Tehzeeb, Indo-Persian heritage, with Sanskritic reformist Hindi, creating a hybrid literary Hindi that was natural in 1915 bhajans. Manind and Prathak, the Persian loan and the Sanskrit inheritance, indicate not only Persio-Sanskritic fusion, but also deep Indo-European kinship. Both words share the same ancestral linguistic family, though they reached Hindi by different routes. So in a way, the line itself is unifying disparate streams, the Indo-Aryan Sanskritic root, Prathak, the Indo-Aryan Persian root, Manind, both ultimately derived from the same Proto-Indo-European source. This single poetic line embodies the civilizational fusion of India in 1915 Persian plus Sanskrit. But beneath it also carries the much older unity of Indo-European language heritage.